Morning, everyone. Thanks for joining the second session in our series of 21 COVID lessons. Last week, George took us through about 7 of them, so we will continue the discussion this morning. Just want to introduce George. For those of you who don't know him, he is one of the long-standing members on the Gauteng Alumni Committee. He is the Chief Executive Officer at St. John's in South Africa, and he lectures at both Wits Business School and the University of Johannesburg, with his prime portfolio being IT and program management. George also coaches and mentors a number of key strategic leaders in the field of business management in South Africa, and he's currently completing his doctorate with the aim to contribute to the field of knowledge management within the patterns of human thinking and the influences on society at large. He has an MBA degree, as well as having studied at Oxford University, Business School of Netherlands, University of Stellenbosch, Duke, and more recently the University of Sheffield Hallam. So George, thank you very much for making your time, and we hand over to you.
Thanks very much. Well, thank you. We had a really great discussion last week, and hoping today is going to be no exception. So we're going to take you forward in some of the conversations that we had last week. COVID has changed our world. There's no two ways about it. And sorry, just bear with me. Just the slideshow has got stuck. And I'm just going to share screen again. Okay, sorry, just bear with. Okay, we're going to have to use this mode. There we go. Okay, Christelle, just confirming you can still see the slides?
Yes, George, we can see it.
Thank you. Oh, unfortunately, the slide view doesn't, the presenter view doesn't seem to work, so I'm just going to have to use this view for now.
Yeah.
But effectively what we're looking at is that the world has changed. It is now a borderless world. We explore images that will become the new normal. There is a new mode of doing business, and there is a new narrative that has evolved as a result of this disease, this virus that has changed our lives. Some of these images are now all too familiar. And yet, if you think about it, when confronted with this image 4 or 5 months ago, what would you have felt? And yet, this is the new normal. What about this image? Sanitizing. Or this image on a train. The world has changed. It has fundamentally changed. And so there are 2 social responses that I want us to explore today. And the one is a denial, strategic rigidity, a failure to comprehend, a fear of extinction, evolution, and self-destruction. Or we could explore this field, which says, hang on, this is part of evolution. This is part of a changing world, and we need to embody those changes. And so what you see here is suspending, seeing, redirecting, sensing, letting go, presencing, letting come, crystallizing, enacting, prototyping, embodying, co-creation, and evolution. And in this slide alone is a whole conversation for a Friday morning. So what we need to be saying to ourselves as business is, do we have the courage to be open? What are we confronting as human beings? We need that compassion, that open heart. And we certainly need to embrace this time with a curiosity and an open mind. Because the reality is, the world will never be the same again. And so in discussion with friends some time ago, I was saying, for me, there's almost this delayed grief. The grief of what was and the uncertainty of what is to come. So we can accept this, we can evolve with it, we can adapt, we can survive. In fact, what we should be discussing is creative freedom embracing, enhancing, and a new human-centered economy. Government response in all of this, and South Africa is not unique. As much as we feel frustrated by some of the ludicrous challenges we're faced with and some of the rule setting that has happened, all governments are battling to comprehend where to from here. The coronavirus has disrupted the world. It is a harbinger of things to come. Behavior has changed the system. What about education? The matrix of systems learning and leadership, the broadening and the deepening thereof. And again, in this slide alone is a whole other conversation that we could have. What we're really talking about now is this virus and its changes in our world has brought a deepening of the whole person. It has brought into stark reality some of our blind spots. And so as business, the question we should be asking is where to from here? How should we be responding to this? And so what I do today is I explore some thinkers with you. Some thinkers who have taken a more planetary minded approach to what is happening and saying, yeah, the world has changed. We can live in denial, or we can say, what does this mean for us? How do we shape our planet from here onwards? And so what are the thinkers saying? The first thinker I want to introduce you to is economist Mariana Mazzucato from University College London. She is currently advisor to President Cyril Ramaphosa, and he has consulted her on policy, particularly in this time of COVID-19. And she makes a few comments here, which I want us to explore. The state's focus should not only be on wealth distribution, but on wealth creation. And if we think where we are at the moment, there is wealth creation that's happening, but we cannot necessarily see it. Government needs to reconfigure its role. What is its role? The political rhetoric of 25 years ago no longer has any place in an evolving society. The gap between the haves and the have-nots is only going to be brought into starker contrast, as you and I will no doubt have seen. She also says that the state should spend its income wisely. In other words, it should be investing wisely for the future. And I take heart from the fact that our president is reaching out to some of these economists and these thinkers. We need a new language to explain the role of the state. Think about it. Prof. Roo, some weeks ago, started to talk about the shift in the political systems the world over. What does this mean now? What is this new narrative? Let's carry on exploring. There is now a more compelling case for innovation-led growth. Innovation's where it's at. That is where the new wealth sits. The state must spearhead innovation in new strategic sectors, but bring the public, private, and civil society sectors together to collaborate across different sectors. And friends, I think this is where we have a missing narrative in our economy today. It is the narrative between state and private and corporate and ordinary citizens in a compelling cadessa of sorts that says, how do we bring these different sectors together so that, as she says, the state must therefore make smarter investments. She also goes on to challenge government's current view on state-owned enterprises, and I'll deal with that in a minute. The state should therefore not just serve as market regulators, but in fact, co-creators of wealth. In this time of economic lockdown, a specific review of state-owned enterprises should be undertaken, she says. There must be a specific reason for the existence of an SOE. They must be essential in markets the private sector is unwilling to enter. So this brings into stark contrast the debate around an Eskom, an airline, etc. You know, why would the private sector not play in that space? Friends, this is what COVID has done, is it's bringing into stark contrast those conversations. Some sectors, however, need to remain in public hands. For example, the essential medicine market, i.e. access to vaccines, is a fundamental human right, where making profit is hard to justify. So some thoughts. And then finally, her thoughts on the way forward. A prerequisite now is for a more equal economy. This in the redistribution of entrepreneurial rewards for workers to share in the company's profits, and for more of those profits to be invested in training a productive, skilled workforce. And I guess here is where we head to. The question is, what workforce do we need to prepare for now? Question for business. Let me introduce you to another thinker. The second thought leader is Jonathan Rauch of the Brookings Institute. And he simply says, plagues drive change. The world over, the Spanish flu, which we referred to last week in 1918, drove substantive change in medical science, in the economy of the day. It was followed by a massive recession, and then, of course, 2 world wars. All of those events fundamentally changed the world. This world we have referred to as our previous normal, in fact, was changed by deadly events like plagues. What this plague has done is it's brought into our view the deadly flaws in the healthcare systems the world over. People have to find new ways to connect and support each other. Demand in healthcare system changes will be inevitable. There is a new political rhetoric which is growing the world over. One only needs to look to the United States of America to look at the rhetoric that's developed as a result of COVID. Left of center, right-wing debates. Where do we go with this? A new democratic emergence, a new form of political governance is emerging. Jonathan goes on to say, a heightened consciousness of the interdependency that we have on each other and a new idea about community. So where to? The emergence of a new breed of social justice warriors. So social justice, equality for all, healthcare for all, equal healthcare for all, the planet, global warming. That whole debate has been brought into stark reality for us as well. Technology and business practices that will enhance the sense of interconnectedness and lack of barriers to entry. Look at this debate again this morning. Last week, we had folk joining us from India, from Australia, from England. Those barriers have disappeared. Look at how convenient it is for us to meet in this forum. Look at how easy it is for us to source and share information. The world has changed. Let me introduce you to another thinker. The third thinker is editor-in-chief, Catherine Mangu-Ward of Reason Magazine. COVID-19, she says, has swept away many of the artificial barriers to moving our lives online. 4 months ago, it was unimaginable that easily 60 or 70% of our working day would be an online day. Not everything can become virtual, of course. However, the uptake of virtual online tools has been slowed by powerful legacy players, often working in tandem with overcautious bureaucrats. Now, she highlights this as a particular barrier, historical barrier. So if we think about safety and security of information, or of 10 Downing Street conducting a cabinet meeting online, that was an unimaginable scenario, or Cyril Ramaphosa conducting cabinet online. It was unimaginable before. It was unimaginable through bureaucrats and technocrats. But the world has changed. She also goes on to highlight that online diagnosis and Medicare, long overdue. Think of a world of robotics. Think of a world of online diagnosis and of medicine being able to reach the poorest of the poor in inhabitable or rather very difficult environments to reach. Think of quality online education, previously resisted by unions and politicians. Where are we now? Homeschooling online, resisted by technocrats and bureaucrats. Where are we now? Friends, the reality is, and I try to find a really nice picture of a genie for you, we cannot put this genie back in its bottle. The world has changed. Think of universities. Think of school campuses. What about expensive dormitories? Would you want to attend a depopulated campus? What about it going to an empty mall? Social distancing, sanitizing till the cows come home. What is the new normal? The difference between hair and makeup for an hour or logging into a Zoom call 15 minutes after getting up. The world has changed. What about employers and their relationship with employees? Can employers now deny employees the option of working from home on the grounds of safety? Remote working is here to stay. I want to introduce you to a fourth thinker, Sherry Turkle of MIT. Perhaps we need to rethink community. Perhaps we need to recreate community through our devices. We're already seeing the emergence of master yoga classes online, gym classes online. Hey, look at this morning, online lecturing. She also goes on to address, in an almost social sciences, hermeneutics, ethnographic sort of way, a newfound human generosity and empathy. The world has changed, the way we perceive community, the way we interact with each other. Yes, there is no replacing the joy of being together. But as we learned last week, we'll begin to ask the questions, should we not be doing this online rather than, in fact, being together? She goes on to say, the moment of truth, asking on myself, has now here, career shaping, an actual ask of ourselves, what is the value we bring? Can that value now translate in an online world? What do people need? Moving forward, we need to find ways to apply our most human instincts to our devices. In other words, what we're starting to talk about is humanizing online interaction. There's a whole new style of how we present, at what height your laptop should be, at what height your device should be, how we talk to each other. A fifth thinker is Elizabeth Bradley, president at Vassar College, scholar of global health. Virtual reality allows us previously denied experiences. What about those who can never travel? Those who cannot board a plane? Mental health gains are immense, and this is almost two sides of the same coin. If we look at what COVID has brought about, and having to make friends with our inner demons, it has brought into stark reality the darkness of loneliness, but also the interconnectedness of families across borders. New world, new thoughts. Virtual reality creates new avenues of experiential learning. Virtual reality breaks down the barriers between haves and have-nots. Virtual reality is an untapped market and will find increasing support. Starting to wrap up now. The sixth thought leader I want to introduce you to is Sonia Trauss of Yimby Law. She goes on to explore how this phase of our lives has brought about truth in a way that we've never experienced it before. Truth and its most popular emissary, science, have been declining in credibility for more than a generation. And in researching for this talk today, one only needs to look to President Trump to look at the denialism and the attack on science. But then, as Obi-Wan Kenobi told us, you're going to find many of the truths we cling to depend greatly on our own point of view. Donald Trump and Stephen Colbert, the concept of truthiness, the increasingly fact-light political discourse. Reality is those days are over. They really are over, because data is there for all to see. The ability to discern truth is where we need to be heading. The oil and gas industry waging a war against the science of truth, climate change, is changing. We only needed to look at the primarily 8 to 12 weeks of lockdown the world over to see that the effects of decreasing air traffic and pollution brought about a change in the world. Not enough to change the climate, but certainly enough to create awareness. Republicans claiming that coronavirus is being mere politics, and this sounded reasonable to millions of people. And in Afrikaans, I say, kyk hoe lyk ons nou. And finally, we're fast being reacquainted with science and the inevitable binary consequences of 1 is yes and 0 is no. It is binary. Climate change has found a true voice in this debate. Germ theory is real. Science doubters can see the impact of this virus. I think we can expect that public respect for expertise in public health and epidemics is partially restored. And so, friends, 7 new reasons business will change. Building, and I remind you of the reasons we discussed last week. Last week we discussed agility, new product, the concept of real estate and new market principles, younger workforces paired with expertise. New wealth is data, new wealth is professional services, new wealth is local markets with global outreach principles. Here are 7 new reasons for you. Education will be free. It's a fact. How universities and schools and any training institute now makes its money will be through new business models. Certification will be what you pay for. As an example, virtual reality is a brand new market. Fluidity of thought, democracy, climate matters will take new precedence. So what does this mean for business? Vaccination is a fundamental human right. Watch this space. As a vaccine is found, watch the scrabble of pharmaceutical companies to try and capitalize on this. But actually, there's a new global ethic that needs to be discussed here. Borderless countries, borderless markets, unregulated. How do you regulate free thought? How do you regulate evolving technology? The technocrats and the bureaucrats are going to have a tough time trying to stop, as I previously alluded to, try and bottle the genie now. You can't. Online commerce, highly evolved, and artificial intelligence and mode of household delivery is fundamentally changing. Those are my thoughts this morning. So what we'd like to do now is open up the panel to discussion. And if at any point you would like access to these slides, simply to, Lizelle, can I propose that folk write to you? Would that be okay? I think Lizelle is still on mute.
George, I'm sure that would be okay.
Great, thanks.
Yes, George, that will be in order.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
We can send the slides.
Okay. I have to say, folks, I mean, preparing for these talks has been such a breeze because the material available at the moment is unbelievable. It really is. That's the world we live in now. But let's go to some questions. And I'm going to ask, is it Werner who's facilitating questions for us this morning?
George. So George, it's other George. George Squared is going to facilitate.
Sorry about that, George.
It's nice today. No, there's no problem. And maybe we can ask George to have, maybe he has a question off the bat and just start the conversation.
I'm actually gonna start with a comment to get the discussion going, George, based on what you're saying, or 2 comments. The first one is that the information that you've provided and picking from these thought leaders is really provoking, and I want to say to you, thank you, because I think to a certain extent, in many of us, there's a very large sense of denial still. We are recognizing change, but I think we're denying the extent of it and the extent to which it's going to impact our lives going forward. And I think what you're bringing forward for us is that we should stop living in denial, and that we should be open-minded as to the extent of the change that we're going to deal with. That's my first comment, and for that I thank you. My second comment that I'd like to make, and it relates to where you ended off with AI and household delivery and those type of things. I'm of the view that there was a time when we deemed the FANGs or the FANGman companies in America to be the so-called high-risk companies. We deemed them to have had volatility. And what I find extremely interesting is with the whole COVID-19 process that we've gone through, those have become the solid companies. Those have become the companies with sustainable business models. The likes of brick and mortar and companies like Boeing and Airbus and guys in construction that were traditionally deemed the strong and the solid and the sustainable companies are the ones that have actually come out to be volatile. And to me, that is a fundamental shift that we've seen, and that informs the principle that everything has changed. And in this regard, I'm thinking about what Johan Rupert said. He said, this is not a pause. He said, this is a reset.
Yes.
And I think that is the critical thing. And I'd like the debate to maybe go into that direction, to say, to what extent have we actually underestimated the change, and are we still in denial?
Thanks, George. I think maybe just appreciate your comments. I think what we've learned is we're woefully unprepared for this change. State is unprepared. The medical infrastructure is unprepared. Business was unprepared. And so the stark decline in business and the reset of business is what we need to watch for now. And if businesses are not thinking about how they engage with their customer in a whole new way, not through bricks and mortar, but through an engaging, community, human-centered way, businesses won't survive this. Yeah.
While I'm waiting for some extra chats on the comment, or extra comments on the chat section, what I'd like to share with you is I am quite active in the business rescue and the insolvency side of industry. And what I found over the last 2 years was we had the occasional liquidation coming through. There were certain industries, especially retail, that were struggling. What we've seen now in I want to say since just before COVID and now, is we've seen companies with old registration numbers coming in and applying for liquidation. Previously, you had a company with a 2000 and onwards registration number, or you had fairly new companies. What we're seeing now is we see companies that were registered in 1971, 1983. I've even got one now, 1963. So we've got companies that have gone through more than one generation of management, companies that are supposed to have a solid foundation. And those are the companies that are now going into liquidation, because, as George pointed out, they were unprepared. They didn't have the ability to adapt, and now they're saying, we can't go any further. We're throwing in the towel. And to me, that is a very significant shift, and that shows us the depth of what we're dealing with.
Absolutely. Thanks, George. I see some questions coming through on the chat there, George.
Yes. Lucky Dinaki, he said, in the increasingly tech-focused world, how do we promote access to tech infrastructure in the developing world? Is lack of access going to be the great barrier to inclusion in the world? Very good question.
Fantastic question, Lucky, and thank you for that. And the answer to that is the barrier. And the positioning to South African businesses is to find a way to deliver tech cheaply and openly. If you are a government like Kenya, I mean, one of the things Kenya did was quite revolutionary, was in fact made data available in bundles to their citizens in Wi-Fi hotspots and in community hotspots. So Kenya, in fact, led the charge as far as African countries are concerned. If we deal, I referred to them last week, like a company like IDEA, who do a phenomenal amount of work in Burundi, Rwanda, more recently Ghana, Tanzania. They have found a way to translate data and content-heavy education into data-like delivery models. Therein lies the opportunity. And so government is in fact, is where I was going this morning, needs to be an enabler. The technocrats, the bureaucrats need to see, or the agenda needs to be, how do we make data an inalienable right, as a vaccine is a right? How do we make access to data a right?
Thank you, George. We've got a follow-up question here from Kagiso. And Kagiso is saying most economies are reliant on tourism. What do you suggest? How should that industry adapt to this new normal? And that's a tough one, George.
It is a tough one. There's two angles to this. One is, I do believe, and certainly in researching the travel industry, that we will return to a mode of leisure travel. Question is how that travel will happen. And against affordability will be a major factor. For example, if you try and book a flight to New Zealand now, it's 38,000 Rand one way. Okay,
one way.
Right? One way. Okay, so is it worth it? The answer is no. There's an opportunity for virtual reality travel, which I think needs to be explored in the longer term. Okay, and so that's another angle we could be looking at. But certainly tourism will need to adapt. It will need to adapt in the means of safety protocols. We are a safe location. Travel with this airline, they are a safe airline. So that whole travel industry is going to have to be turned on its head. The question, I suppose, Kagiso, is how many of these industries are going to survive the current lockdown? Because the current thinking is anywhere between 18 to 24 months before borders reopen. Spain reopened its borders and within a month had to close its borders again. New Zealand has not opened its borders at all. So at what point do we resume a new normality in travel? And I guess this is an ongoing question, Kagiso. So I'm answering it in multiple ways. I think there's a virtual reality tourism opportunity. And make no mistake, some will go for that kind of experiential feeling. And certainly then, of course, there's the actual experience and how we have to adapt to that.
George, I'd like to pick up on what you said there. My neighbor across the street, together with a group of friends, did the Serengeti last year. And during lockdown, he was watching some high definition videos that he had obtained on the Serengeti. And his words to me were that he doesn't think that he would venture into such a travel experience again, because what he's seeing in terms of the quality of product that's available is far superior to what his real experience was. And I think that is now becoming a reality for us, and that is pulling through into virtual reality. If you can have a closer wildlife experience through virtual reality than through actually being there and attending at a fraction of the price, that is what people might starting to go for, especially if you take into account your risk that's associated with traveling with COVID, even if we are saying that we are moving into a relatively safer area.
Yes.
So in that, I believe that there can be a premium for a superior virtual reality experience, which ultimately will be a major discount to any form of real experience. So in that lies a commercial opportunity for the people going into virtual reality.
Absolutely, and augmented reality, George. So virtual reality, but also experiential. Augmented reality is, for example, dealing with a software company recently who sell property in Cyprus. And the way they sell that property is through an augmented reality experience. So you can take virtual tours of the property you're about to buy. In the new real estate market, augmented reality will start to play its own role as well.
Again, there's another opportunity in that. We've got another question from Herbie Rizhav. What do you believe the long-term effects of the new normal will be on human intimacy and mental health issues? Well thought through there.
Absolutely. Thanks, Herbie. Sure. Great question. And fascinating one, because I'll give you an example. So I attended a memorial service online. For somebody that passed away recently, beautifully done. I mean, the memorial service was really beautifully done. But there was the missing experience of being together and comforting each other. And human beings need comfort. And so to answer you, I think the impact on human intimacy is going to be huge. And so I think that's where connectedness, which is what one of the speakers was getting to, the inter-community connectedness is something that's going to have to be overcome. We're going to have to find ways to connect. So we can connect within our small family units once we're all able to get back together again. But what does it mean for global interconnectedness? We now talk about borderless countries. And so identity. What does that mean for our identity as human beings? And to answer you, I don't have the answer, but you've set me a challenge. So for Friday next week, I'm going to explore this one and see what we can come up with.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mental health issues are huge at the moment. It's not beat around the bush. Folk being locked within their homes, in isolated environments, having a virtual connectedness, but being forced to deal with their own inner darkness, so to speak. And so there's a whole psychology conversation we could have around that as well.
Yeah, I think, George, on the mental health issues, a lot of governments should be looking at how do they actually provide sort of counseling more freely available to a lot of people. The World Health Organization had estimated that depression would increase this year, probably by only about 10 to 15%. That was pre-COVID. The stats at the moment is it's over 60%. And the rate of suicide has increased by over 55% year on year. So it is going to be a challenge. And I think that it's an opportunity for organizations, like something like yourselves and those kind of organizations in the social sphere and communities to actually pull together. And I think that's the one thing that COVID is actually going to do. So here's how our borders are going to start getting smaller, but our communities are going to start getting bigger. So there's that interplay and where's the balance. And I think that's probably what we need to land on as we go forward.
100%. No, thanks, Verna. I think that's a great comment. There is a comment here from one of our guests, or one of our attendees, and it's around virtual business succeeding now, but we're living on our reserves during lockdown. We must start manufacturing, construction, production again. And absolutely. And I think one of the things we explored last week, and I see there's a comment around farming as well, is that we did explore a decentralized manufacturing approach. So, providing the product guidelines, so intellectual property and a decentralized manufacturing approach and local supply chain. If we think of a world of 3D printing as an example, we're fast getting to a point where you can print anything, including human cells, cartilage for knees. There's something called DNA ink, okay, that can replicate the DNA of the human body. So no longer do you reject a transplant, as an example. So this world is it's fascinating. it's, it's such a great time to be alive, such a frightening time, but such a great time to be alive as well. You know, so absolutely. So I hear you. Manufacturing, construction, producing again, and we need food. We discussed last week urban farming. You know, converting our inner cities to inner farms. The inner city of Johannesburg, converting 7 buildings at this stage to inner city farms. It's happening. It's happening as we speak. Yeah?
George, if we move to a question by Marcus Libber, it is clear that the world is changing, but the challenge is now in the transition phase. What to do now while we are not yet set up for this new world?
Absolutely. Great question, Marcus. And so my personal advice is education, education, education. It's reskilling. We need to reskill for multiple careers. You and I, we all, well, let me make some assumptions here. Some of us grew up with you were loyal to one company. You learned to trade, you got your degree, and that's what you did. You were a CA for the rest of your life, or you were a doctor for the rest of your life, and so the world carries on. Actually, now what we're doing is we're needing to multi-skill, and we're needing to prepare our children for multiple careers, you know, different streams of careers. And, you know, somebody said last week, I thought it was a great comment, you know, if Rip Van Winkle had to wake up today, the only thing he would recognize is the education system. Okay. And that is so true, you know. And we're talking basic education, Marianne, into part of your conversation. You know, so basic education all the way through to tertiary education has got to change. So to answer your question, Marcus, at this stage we need to prepare for this new world. And one of the thinkers I was exploring this morning was simply saying, what have I got to offer, and can I translate this in a virtual and an online world? And that's the deeper question we need to ask of ourselves. Kagiso, I see you've got a question there. How does one help deal with the mental health impact of this new normal, the lockdown? The scary thought is running out of those reserves because people are not back to the plants to continue production. Absolutely right. And so what we need to be saying to ourselves is, how do we make mental health awareness more accessible? There was a time where it was taboo to talk about mental health, but it isn't anymore. I think we're breaking those barriers down fast. There is an opportunity around self-awareness in the mental health space. How do we enable our connectedness and our community to be able to speak safely about mental health issues, to know who they can reach out to, and what is available online? What online resources are there? And in fact, if you look, I mean, there's great availability, but a basic understanding of mental health awareness needs to be promoted. Those are some of the thoughts on it. I don't have all the answers, but some thoughts.
George, just a thought that comes to mind, and I'm not sure whether we have got the functionality set up. Yeah, we actually do. I think in terms of the reactions or so. I'd like to pose the question, and if everybody look on their Zoom to the right, if you agree with a statement, or if you say yes to the statement I'm going to pose, you can give us the thumbs up. If you don't comment, we don't give us a thumbs up, I'm going to accept that your view is no. But the question that I'd like to pose to our attendees this morning is, do you believe that COVID is only the first of, let's call it multiple, play safe, multiple can be 2, multiple can be 3, diseases or pandemics of this nature to may potentially hit us? Yes or no? So is this an isolated event? If it's an isolated event, don't give us the thumbs up. If you believe this is the first of potentially multiple events, give us the thumbs up, that we can just do a quick assessment and see what your views are. So there's quite a few people that are saying that this just the first of multiple events. And I think if we take what we've heard out of China, there are 2 other strains of potentially pandemic, of potential pandemics that have already been identified. So I'd like to go back to the previous question, George, where they say, how do we prepare? How do we transition? I think part of that is to say that we have to position that this might not be 12, 18, 24 months on COVID only. We might have this type of problem, this type of pandemic arising again in the future, and we then need to be really well prepared in order to deal with it, in order not to be thrown off our lives and our livelihoods the way that it's done at this time around. Absolutely.
I think it's a great comment, George. Absolutely. So building on this, Nigel, you pose a question here around, as a campus planner for UCT, how do we prepare for a 32,000 student intake, okay, and a campus that can accommodate for that? I would pose the question to you to think about, and maybe we can explore this as a topic, is universities reimagined? Communities of practice reimagined? Urban farming reimagined? Connected communities on campus completely reimagined? And I think that's where we're heading. It's not a definitive answer. I'm just, I guess I'm asking, think about it slightly differently.
George, Mariana Feenstra has got a question or statement here. She's saying you spot on about self-awareness of mental health. I find this constantly on social platforms where people's comments about being introverts and content to stay at home more or less indefinitely belie their other posts, which are envious of those who, for instance, go shopping and drinking a cup of coffee. Just a comment. So what we've got here is we've got people that are actually communicating conflict or sharing with us conflicting statements. Is that not maybe representative of how confused people actually are within this new normal?
Absolutely. It's a new field, and I think that's the short answer. And social media, in fact, is a great platform or means to understand at a pure hermeneutics human level what is in fact happening in society. And so I think what I'll try and do is let me explore this topic as well next week, if that's okay, because we're starting to wrap up now. And then there was also a question around gender-based violence. I mean, this has been brought into stark reality, what's been happening. So the positive in this is that there is an emergence of a much stronger voice for gender-based violence, and platforms and connectedness and communities are starting to speak about this in the same way that we speak about mental health. There is an openness to address this. We give it a name, which we didn't do before. And so I think what we need to be saying to ourselves is how do we create safe platforms for those who are impacted by gender-based violence to be able to speak about it, those who are perpetrators of gender-based violence to seek help, etc., etc. And it sort of starts playing into the whole social construct of society. I mean, it's a rabbit hole. I tell you, there's so much we can do. But with your permission, I think I'll pick up on gender-based violence again next week. Pick up on mental health and what that means for business, etc. But if I may suggest, I think we need to start wrapping up, George, Werner, if that's okay.
100%. Thank you very much. George, from my side, thank you so much for enlightening us again, providing us food for thought before the long weekend. I trust that the attendees will think about what you shared with us this morning, come back for the next round, and let's be active in our thoughts, people. Let's find our way within the new normal and try and shield ourselves both from a commercial point of view as well as from a mental and a social point of view, against the negatives of what we experienced. Christelle made the comment to say business is now learning fast to position for recovery post any future pandemic. Absolutely, we have to deal with that positioning, and we also need to say, how do we position, I'm repeating myself, for an uncertain new normal, for an uncertain future. So it was really great attending. Thank you very much for your efforts and for all the thoughts and thought-provoking ideas.
Such a great pleasure, George and Werner and Christelle and as well, and everyone at USB. There was one comment which I think was